Being loved too much, is it really a good thing? Since I was little, I was always the golden child in my mother's eyes. But as I grew older, I realized it wasn't love, but the price I had to pay for loneliness, jealousy, and unspeakable conflicts. Sometimes, love can be a burden, and I am the one who carries it for life. I used to think I was lucky. That's what everyone told me, right? You're the favorite. You're the golden child. At least that's how it looked on the surface. But what if I told you that being the chosen one came at a cost so high, it left scars I still can't explain? It starts with the small things. Like when your mom smiles at you just a bit longer than the others. Or when your dad says your name with pride, but there's a hidden warning in his eyes. It's all praise and attention, until it's not. No one tells you about the bitterness that brews in the shadows. The quiet resentment. The distance that grows between you and everyone else. The little whispers when you're not around. The silent treatment. The envy disguised as love. But the worst part? You don't see it until it's too late. And by then, you're already trapped. You'll never know how far you'll go until one day, you realize you're the villain in your own story. Or are you? Maybe it's all just the price of being loved too much. My mother always said, "You're my pride and joy." That's a phrase I hear every day in and day out, to the point where I started to believe I was special, the one and only deserving of her unconditional love. Those words were like a sedative, a medicine that made me feel important. But that was only true when I didn't see the silent glances from my siblings, when I didn't feel the coldness in their eyes every time I entered the room. They didn't say anything, but I knew. Those words, those actions, made me feel like I was living in a shadow, a big shadow I couldn't escape. Mom would always tell me, "You don't have to try too hard, just be yourself." I never understood why she said that. But I began to realize, the more I was loved, the more I felt pushed away. My siblings would never say it out loud, but those cold glances, those forced smiles, all conveyed the same message: Mom only has one golden child, and that's me. I wasn't the only one in the family. But why did Mom always give me special attention? Why, every time we sat down for a meal together, did she always have me sit next to her, while my siblings had to sit off to the side? I knew they didn't like it. And honestly, neither did I. With each compliment from Mom, I felt a bigger distance grow between me and them. What I thought were joyful family moments only highlighted my loneliness. They didn't speak, but I could hear their sighs during the quiet afternoons. Mom never noticed, or maybe she did but didn't care. She'd always say, "I just want you to be happy, that's all that matters." But I wasn't happy. How could I be when everyone in the house looked at me like I was an outsider, even though I was the one Mom loved the most? I remember once, walking into the living room with a big smile on my face. "Mom, I just got another award for being top student." Mom turned, looked at me, her eyes shining like sunbeams streaming through the room, and said, "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." I turned to my siblings, only to see them sit silently, not clapping, not smiling. I could feel the heavy silence in the air, as though they were trying to swallow the bitterness in their mouths but couldn't. They didn't congratulate me, and I didn't know what to do with the feeling that came over me. It was from that moment I began to understand. The love Mom gave me wasn't unconditional, it was a burden I couldn't share with anyone. The loneliness I felt in my own home was the worst thing. I had everything, yet no one was truly by my side. There was a time when I sat alone in my room, looking out the window. Mom wasn't home, Dad was at work. It was just me and the room, and that's when I started to feel the pain of being alone. I asked myself, if I weren't the golden child, would life be different? Would my siblings see me differently? Would I be loved for who I truly was, or was I just an object Mom could show off to her friends? But then I told myself, I couldn't blame Mom. She only loved me the way she knew how. And me? I was just stuck in a web of emotions that I couldn't even begin to understand. This feeling was like a vicious circle. The more love I received from Mom, the more I felt like an outsider in my own family. The more I was loved, the lonelier I became. And I couldn't escape it. I couldn't. But there was one thing I hadn't considered. One thing that, only when everything had already happened, I realized, all those compliments, all that admiration, were just a trap. Because when you're the golden child, you can't just be an ordinary kid. You have to be something perfect, something that always holds that position. And if you can't, you'll have to pay the price. There came a point when I couldn't ignore it anymore. The invisible wall between me and my siblings had grown so high, I couldn't see over it. It wasn't just the little things anymore. The cold stares, the unspoken resentment, the way they'd suddenly go quiet when I walked into the room, it was all too much to ignore. I remember a day, not long ago, when we were all supposed to be together for family dinner. It was one of those rare nights when we'd actually sit around the table as a family. I had just come home from school, my grades were high, my achievements were many, and all I wanted was for someone to acknowledge it, besides Mom. I walked into the kitchen, ready to share my news. "I made the basketball team," I said, my voice a bit too excited for my own comfort. My dad was the first to glance up. His face was always so hard to read. "Good for you," he said, but there was no real emotion in his voice. I should have been used to it by now, but it stung. Dad never had time for me, not like he did for my older siblings. My brothers and sisters had their moments with him, but I felt like I was always left on the sidelines. I turned to my brother, hoping he might be happy for me, but he barely looked up from his phone. "Cool," he muttered, his attention already elsewhere. My younger sister, the one who always followed me around as a kid, didn't even bother to look at me. She was too busy picking at her food, her face buried in her plate. I felt it. The distance. The gap. I was supposed to be the one who was always celebrated, but here I was, sitting at the table with a hollow victory and nothing but silence to accompany it. "Mom, aren't you proud of me?" I asked, unable to hold it in anymore. The words slipped out before I could stop them. I turned to look at her, but her face was already beaming at me. She wasn't like the others. Mom always made sure to make me feel special. "You're amazing, sweetheart," she said, reaching out to touch my hand. "I'm so proud of you." But it wasn't enough anymore. It wasn't enough because I could see how it hurt them. I could feel it in the room, the weight of their frustration hanging in the air. Mom's pride was my comfort, but it was also my prison. I was trapped in a role I hadn't chosen, a role that none of them wanted me to have. The golden child, the one who could do no wrong. I could see it now. My siblings were resentful, not just of the attention I received, but because I was the constant reminder of what they couldn't have. They were all good in their own ways, but they didn't get the praise I did. They didn't get the recognition. And while they smiled, they didn't smile for me. They smiled because they had to. There were moments when I thought I could change it. I tried to pull away from the constant praise, to lower the expectations, to be less perfect, less present. But every time I stepped back, every time I tried to disappear into the background, it felt like something inside me cracked. It wasn't just the love that hurt, it was the expectation that I had to be the best, that I had to outshine everyone else, that I had to be perfect. And when I wasn't perfect, when I failed or made a mistake, the world around me seemed to crumble. I saw the disappointment in their eyes, the judgment in their whispers. And suddenly, all that love, all that attention from Mom, felt like it was being thrown in my face. It was too much. I couldn't help but wonder if this was what I wanted. Was this really worth it? The constant need to perform, the pressure to always be the one everyone looked up to? I felt like I was losing myself in the process. It wasn't until one night, after another argument between me and my siblings, that I began to see the truth. It was one of those fights that started over something small but grew into something much bigger. A misplaced comment. A joke about how I was always getting all the attention. I didn't think much of it at first, but then it escalated. My older brother, who had always been quiet and distant, suddenly exploded. "You think you're so special, don't you?" he shouted at me. "Always in the spotlight, always Mom's favorite. You have no idea what it's like for the rest of us." His words cut through me like a knife, sharper than anything I had ever felt. It was like a veil had been lifted, and I could finally see the ugly truth. The truth that I had been blind to all these years. My siblings didn't just resent me, they were angry at me. Angry because I had something they didn't. The thing that had always been the most important to them, the love and approval of our parents. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know how to defend myself. I wanted to tell him that I didn't choose this, that I didn't ask to be in the spotlight. But the truth was, it didn't matter. None of it mattered. The damage was done. I had unknowingly caused pain to the very people I cared about most. I turned to leave the room, but before I could, my younger sister spoke up. "You don't get it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You've always had everything. But we never stood a chance." That was when it hit me. The full weight of it all. I had been living in a bubble, thinking I was the one who was suffering, the one who was misunderstood. But the truth was, I was the one who had caused the pain. And in that moment, I realized I couldn't go back. I couldn't undo the years of resentment, the years of distance, the years of being the golden child. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know where to start. All I knew was that I had to make a choice. A choice to stop being perfect, to stop being the one who always won. To stop being the one who held all the love and all the attention. But could I do that? Could I step out of the role I had been trapped in all these years? And what would happen if I did? The days that followed were a blur. My mind was spinning, replaying that argument over and over again. It was like an alarm that wouldn't stop ringing in my head, louder with every passing hour. I couldn't escape it, couldn't block it out. The words my brother had thrown at me, my sister's broken voice, those were the things that haunted me now, the things I couldn't shake. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen like I did every day, but today, everything felt different. The usual silence that greeted me seemed heavier, thicker. The air was thick with things left unsaid. Mom was at the stove, humming to herself, a small smile on her face as she always did when she was busy cooking. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, her voice warm and familiar, like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't go on with this mask of being the perfect child, the golden child who had it all together. I stared at her, my mind racing, the words forming in my mouth but never quite making it out. She turned to me, her smile faltering just slightly. "What's wrong, dear? You look like you've seen a ghost." I wanted to tell her everything. To finally speak the truth that had been eating away at me for so long. I wanted to scream at her that I wasn't perfect, that I wasn't the perfect child she thought I was. I wanted to tell her that her love, her attention, it wasn't what I wanted, not in the way she gave it. That it had ruined everything. But I didn't. Instead, I just smiled. A tight, fake smile. "Nothing, Mom. I'm fine." She didn't push further, just nodded and handed me a plate of eggs, her gaze softening as she returned to her humming. The silence between us felt suffocating. I had just realized that my entire life had been a lie. Not because of the love she gave me, but because of how I had come to expect it, how I had used it to define who I was. I was no longer the golden child. I wasn't even sure who I was anymore. But I couldn't stop playing the role. It wasn't until a few days later, when I was walking home from school, that the weight of it all really hit me. The streets were quieter than usual, the autumn air crisp against my skin. I was lost in thought when I felt someone walking beside me. I looked over, and there was my younger sister, her backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder. She wasn't saying anything, just walking in step with me, her eyes focused on the ground. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The space between us felt wide, like we were oceans apart. But eventually, she broke the silence. "Why do you act like everything's fine?" she asked quietly, her voice softer than I expected. "You know you're not okay, right? I can see it." I stopped walking, staring at her, surprised. "What do you mean?" "You think Mom's love is everything," she continued, not looking at me. But it's not. You think you're so perfect, that she loves you more than anyone else. But we all see it. We all feel it. And it's not just about you. It's about us too. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words got stuck in my throat. She wasn't wrong. The guilt, the resentment, the feeling that I was the one who had it all, she was right. I'm not perfect, I whispered, my voice almost breaking. I'm not what she wants me to be. I don't want to be this anymore. I don't know who I am. She finally looked at me, her eyes searching mine. It's okay, she said softly. You don't have to be perfect. None of us do. But you have to let go of this idea that you're better than the rest of us, just because mom makes you feel like you are. You're not. Her words hit harder than anything my brother had said, harder than anything mom could ever say. I was so focused on trying to live up to this ideal, this perfect version of me, that I had lost touch with everything else. I was chasing something that wasn't real. And I had dragged everyone down with me in the process. I'm sorry, I said, finally letting the words come out. I never meant to make things harder for you. She didn't say anything for a moment, but then she nodded. Just stop pretending, okay? Be real. Be you. It felt like a weight had been lifted from my chest. The facade I had built around myself was starting to crumble, and with it, a sense of freedom I hadn't realized I needed. I didn't have to be the golden child anymore. I didn't have to play the part everyone expected me to. But the problem wasn't just with me. It was with the family dynamic, with the way mom had built everything around me. She had set me up for failure, expecting me to always be the best, to be perfect. She had put me in a position where I had to prove something, to be something I wasn't. And now, it was too late to take it all back. The hardest part was knowing that I had hurt my siblings, that I had unknowingly been the cause of their pain and resentment. I couldn't take back the years of attention, the years of being the one everyone looked up to, but I could try to change. But how? Where did I even start? I didn't have all the answers. In fact, I wasn't sure I had any answers at all. But I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't keep living this lie. I had to face the consequences of being the golden child and find a way to make it right, if that was even possible. But it wasn't going to be easy. And I was far from ready. The days after my conversation with my sister felt like the calm before the storm. I was no longer pretending to be something I wasn't, but the truth was, I had no idea what came next. The guilt of what I had done to my siblings gnawed at me constantly, but it wasn't just guilt. There was fear, too. Fear that everything I had built with my family, this image of being the perfect child, was about to come crumbling down. And worse, I was terrified of what would happen if I truly let go. I started avoiding home. I'd tell mom I was staying after school to work on projects, and I'd take the long route to get there, wandering aimlessly. I couldn't face them, not yet. Not when I didn't even know how to fix things. How could I fix something that was so broken? The tension in the house had become unbearable. My brother barely spoke to me anymore, and my sister, although she had shown me some understanding, still seemed distant, her eyes carrying a weight I could no longer ignore. It was one evening, as I was coming home late, that things finally broke. I walked into the living room to find my family gathered, all of them sitting in uncomfortable silence. Mom looked up when I entered, but instead of her usual warm smile, her face was taut, her eyes narrowed. My brother didn't look up from his phone, and my sister was fiddling with the hem of her sleeve, a nervous habit I knew all too well. Sit down, Mom's voice was cold, sharper than I'd ever heard it before. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. Something was wrong. I slowly lowered myself into the seat across from them, and for the first time in years, I felt like an outsider in my own home. You've been avoiding us, Mom said, her voice measured, but I could hear the hurt behind it. You've been avoiding your family. Why? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. How could I answer that? How could I explain that I was afraid of the truth? That I was afraid of breaking the perfect image I had spent years building? It's not just you, she continued, her eyes narrowing. It's all of you. The way things have been going in this house. It's not healthy. I've been letting it slide for so long because I didn't want to believe it, but it's time we talk. I looked around the room at my siblings' faces. My brother's expression was unreadable, but I could see the bitterness in his eyes. My sister's gaze was locked on the floor, but there was something different in her eyes now. It wasn't the same look of quiet resignation, it was something more intense, more painful. Mom continued, I know I put too much on you. I've made you the center of everything, and I've let you carry the weight of this family's expectations. But I don't want you to be this perfect image anymore. I want you to be you. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been running away from the truth, and now it was right in front of me. I didn't know what to say, what to feel. My whole life, I had been trying to meet expectations that I wasn't sure I even wanted anymore, and now, Mom was telling me she didn't need that from me. She didn't need me to be perfect. But my siblings, my brother and sister, what about them? We've been holding it in for too long, my brother said suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. He finally put down his phone, his eyes meeting mine. You think it's just you who has problems. You think you're the only one who feels the pressure. But it's not true. We've all felt it. Every single one of us. The word stung. I had never considered that. I had always thought I was the one bearing the brunt of everything, the one who was suffering under the weight of being the golden child. But I was wrong. They had been carrying their own burdens all along, burdens I had never even thought to consider. I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I didn't know. I didn't see it. My sister finally looked up, her eyes meeting mine. There was no anger, no resentment, just a quiet sadness. You were never the problem, she said softly. It was the way we were all treated. The way we were all kept in your shadow. You didn't ask for it, but neither did we. I felt a lump form in my throat. The weight of it all was too much. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just my fault. I had spent so many years thinking I was the source of all the tension, thinking I was the one who had ruined everything. But now I could see the truth. The way we had all been living, the way we had all been pretending, it was eating us alive. I don't know how to fix this, I said, my voice trembling. I don't know how to make things right. You don't have to fix everything, Mom replied, her voice softening. We just need to start being honest with each other. No more pretending. No more playing roles. Just be family again. It wasn't going to be easy. There was no magic fix, no quick way to make things better. But in that moment, I knew that I had to face my fears, face the damage I had caused. I couldn't keep running away. And I couldn't keep hiding from the truth. We were all hurting. But now, for the first time in years, we were finally talking about it. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. I could hear the quiet rhythm of my breath, feel the weight of my family's eyes on me. For the first time, it wasn't the weight of expectations but of shared pain, a pain that we had all been carrying, each in our own way, without ever truly acknowledging it. I was no longer just the golden child, the one who always had it together. I wasn't the one to be envied, nor the one to be praised. I was just me. And in that moment, I realized that was more than enough. I didn't need to be perfect anymore. I didn't need to carry the weight of everyone's expectations on my shoulders. It was time for the rest of us to step forward and be real, to show our true selves, even if it meant embracing the ugly parts, the uncomfortable truths. It wasn't going to be easy. I knew that. Healing rarely is. But that evening, something shifted. The air felt lighter, not because everything was fixed, but because we had finally spoken the truth. We had finally acknowledged the things that had been eating away at us for so long. The shame, the resentment, the loneliness, it was all out in the open now, and that was the first step toward healing. After dinner, when the dishes were cleared and the quiet had settled back into the house, my brother and sister came to sit beside me. No words were exchanged at first. We didn't need to say anything. We just sat there, together, in the same space, in a way we hadn't in years. "Are you okay?" My brother asked me quietly, his voice almost uncertain, as though it was the first time he was genuinely asking me. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I will be. I think we all will be." My sister nodded, the look in her eyes softening. "We just need time. All of us." I looked at them, really looked at them for the first time in years. They weren't the enemies I had imagined them to be. They were just like me, trying to navigate a family that had been built on unrealistic expectations, trying to find their own place in a world that never gave them a chance to be themselves. We had all been trapped in a system of silent competition, of trying to be the one who could measure up to the impossible standards we thought were set for us. But now, for the first time, we were free to just be. And it was terrifying. But it was also liberating. The next few weeks were filled with quiet changes. There were no dramatic moments, no sudden revelations. But in the small things, in the way we talked, the way we interacted, things were different. My brother began to open up, no longer shutting himself off in his room, and my sister, who had always been the quiet observer, began to share her thoughts without fear of judgment. And Mom, she started to see us, really see us, as the people we were, not the roles she had assigned us. We began to have real conversations, not just the superficial exchanges we had been having for years. It wasn't always easy, and sometimes the silence between us grew thick again, but we were trying. We were learning how to be honest with each other, even when it was hard. One evening, as we sat around the table for dinner, Mom spoke up, her voice hesitant but filled with a sincerity I hadn't heard in years. "I've been thinking," she started, looking at each of us, "about how things were, about the way I treated all of you. I know I've made mistakes. I've treated you all like you were parts in a puzzle, each one needing to fit a certain way. But that's not who you are. You're all different, and that's what makes us who we are." We were all quiet, digesting her words. They weren't perfect, they didn't fix everything, but they were a start. A real start. And for the first time, I saw something in her eyes that wasn't just pride or expectation. It was love. Real love. Not the kind that came with strings attached, but the kind that accepted flaws, embraced the messiness of family, and still found room for growth. "I'm sorry," she whispered, as if it was the hardest thing she had ever said. "I'm sorry for making you feel like you had to be perfect." And just like that, I knew that we could move forward. We didn't need to be perfect anymore. We didn't need to fulfill some impossible role or live up to some unattainable standard. We were allowed to be human. Allowed to be flawed. Allowed to be free. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of tension, moments when the old habits resurfaced, but it didn't matter. We had taken the hardest step, the first step toward forgiveness, toward understanding, toward being real with each other. It would take time. It would take effort. But we were no longer just a family of roles and expectations. We were a family of people, with real feelings, with flaws and hopes and dreams. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged. Not because I was the golden child, but because I was simply me. And that, in itself, was enough. The days that followed weren't magical. There was no sudden transformation, no perfect reconciliation. But what I began to realize was that healing doesn't come with fireworks or grand gestures. It comes quietly, in the moments when you least expect it. When you find yourself sitting at the dinner table, not because you're the one being praised, but because you're simply part of the conversation. When you laugh with your siblings, not out of obligation, but because you genuinely enjoy their company. It wasn't an easy journey, and it wasn't a straight path. There were days when the old wounds resurfaced, days when old habits crept back in, and the uncomfortable silence would fall over the house again. But there was also something different now. A sense of understanding, a sense of respect that hadn't been there before. And we were all trying, really trying, to be better. I started talking to my brother more, really talking to him. And slowly, his coldness began to thaw. He told me about his own struggles, things I had never known because I had been so focused on my own image of being the perfect one. We talked about our dad, about how we both wished we had more of his attention, more of his time, but we never said it aloud. It felt good to finally say it. My sister was still quiet, still the observer, but every now and then, she'd slip me a note or share a song that made her think of me. Small things, little moments, that meant more than words could say. And Mom was learning, too. She didn't just say the right things anymore, she showed it through her actions. She started to let go of the idea that I was the perfect child who needed to succeed in everything, and began to celebrate each of us for who we truly were, with all our flaws, all our imperfections. She stopped making everything about me, and for the first time, it felt like I could breathe. Like I wasn't a puppet on a string anymore. But still, there were moments. Moments when the tension flared up again, when we all got caught in the old patterns, when I felt the weight of expectations begin to creep back into the air. There were days when I wanted to scream, when I felt like I was going to lose everything I had worked for. And those were the moments that hurt the most. Because the truth was, we weren't fixed. We hadn't solved everything. But that's the thing about family. It's messy. It's never going to be perfect. But the work, real work, begins when you stop pretending, when you stop trying to force everything into neat little boxes. When you allow the mess, when you allow the chaos and the mistakes, and still choose to show up for each other. I remember the night when it finally hit me. It was one of those quiet nights, after another long day of trying to figure out what comes next. I had been working late on a school project, and when I walked into the kitchen to grab a drink, Mom was sitting there, looking out the window, a cup of tea in her hand. "Hey," I said quietly, unsure if she was awake or lost in thought. She turned to me, a soft smile on her face. "Hey, sweetheart." I stood there for a moment, just looking at her. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was being judged or measured up against some impossible standard. I felt like I could just be myself. "I know I've been a mess," I said, finally speaking the truth I'd been holding in for so long. "I'm sorry for all the times I made you feel like I was the only one who mattered." She looked at me, her eyes softening. "You were never the only one who mattered, you know that, right?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I really did know it. "I think I've been so caught up in what everyone expects from me, I forgot what really matters." She took a deep breath and put down her tea, her expression serious. "I don't expect perfection from you, you know. I just want you to be happy. I just want you to be who you are, even if it's messy. Even if it's hard." I wanted to tell her that I was still learning what that meant. That I didn't have all the answers. But I didn't. Instead, I just smiled and sat down next to her. We didn't say much after that. But we didn't need to. The words didn't matter as much anymore. It was the space we shared, the quiet understanding that passed between us. For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were finally seeing each other. Not as roles to be played, but as real people. And that was enough. The weeks that followed were still filled with struggles, with moments of doubt, with long silences and quiet tears. But there was a lightness to the air now, something I hadn't felt in a long time. We were learning to be honest with each other, to face the uncomfortable truths that had been buried for so long. And even though it wasn't perfect, I could feel the shift. I could feel the healing happening, slowly but surely. It wasn't about being the golden child anymore. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being real. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to prove anything. I didn't need to be the best. I just needed to be me. And that, in itself, was enough. And that's a wrap for today's story. If you've made it this far, thank you for sticking with us. I know, it wasn't an easy journey, but together, we've watched a family face their darkest moments, confront painful truths, and find a way to heal. But remember, this story doesn't end here, it's only just the beginning. If you enjoyed this video, or if it made you reflect on your own family dynamics, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with someone who might need to hear this story too. We'd love to know what you think and hear your thoughts on what we can dive into next. What themes or topics should we explore in our upcoming videos? Let us know your ideas and suggestions in the comments below, and who knows? Your idea could be the next one we bring to life. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next episode. We've got a lot more raw, emotional stories, and thought-provoking discussions coming your way, stories that are just as real and as impactful as this one. You don't want to miss it. Until next time, don't forget to stay true to who you are. And remember, whatever you're facing, you're not alone. We'll be back with more, so come join us for the next chapter. See you soon. This is Bleak Bite, where truth isn't just a story, it's a conversation.